What if I told you that the greatest scientific leaps in history were made in sterile university labs, but in a horrific compound hidden in the frostbitten plains of occupied China? A place where the pursuit of knowledge wasn't just unethical, it was a synonym for torture. This is the chilling, virtually unbelievable story of Unit 731, where ambition fused with atrocity, and the secrets they uncovered reshaped the geopolitical landscape forever. Section 1. The Veil of Silence. Origins and the Rise of Ishii Shiro. Imagine a man who saw no boundary between medicine and murderer. Brilliant, charismatic figure whose obsession became a nation's darkest secret. This is the starting point of our story. The rise of Lieutenant General Ishii Shiro, the architect of Unit 7. In the 1930s, as the world braced for another global conflict, Japan was already preparing for a form of warfare few could comprehend: biological warfare. Ishii, a military doctor and microbiologist with a flair for the dramatic and a profound disregard for human life, convinced the Imperial Army's high command that the ultimate weapon wasn't steel or gunpowder, but invisible microbes. His argument was brutally simple. Conventional war was messy, expensive, and slow. A strategic strike with disease plague, anthrax, cholera could cripple an entire nation's defense, population, and economy without destroying infrastructure. This wasn't just a military theory. It was a deeply ingrained cultural and strategic belief in Japan's capacity for total war. The first step was to secure a location and absolute secrecy. In 1935, Ishii established his first secret facility near Harbin in occupied Manchuria. The official designation, the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department. It was a brilliant, cynically misleading cover. Who would suspect mass atrocity behind a name designed to suggest public health? But why was this secret so essential? And why was Ishii given virtually unlimited power? Because to develop these ultimate weapons, Ishii argued, they needed the ultimate test subject, the human body. Specifically, the bodies of those they considered enemies of the state, prisoners of war, local civilians, and political dissidents. They needed to study disease vectors in living people, to understand how quickly a population would succumb, and to calculate the perfect dosage for mass death. This wasn't just a lab. It was an industrial complex dedicated to the production of suffering. And the moment Ishii convinced the emperor's inner circle, the fate of thousands of innocents was sealed. What kind of moral landscape allows a state to not only condone but actively finance and protect a project that equates scientific discovery with the deliberate infliction of terror? That is the question we must carry as we step through the gates of this horrifying history. Section 2. The Maruta Factory. Inside the walls of biological atrocity. Once Ishii Shiro had his cover and his funding, he needed his victims. They had a chilling, dehumanizing name for them: Maruta. This literally translates to logs or lumber. It wasn't a casual nickname. It was a policy, a deliberate stripping away of identity, designed to make the scientists and staff view their subjects not as human beings, but as disposable biological material for experimentation. Unit 731 was an enormous compound near the village of Pingfang, covering 6 square kilometers. It was a self-contained city of horror, hidden from the world by barbed wire, watchtowers, and a vast military guard. But what exactly was happening inside these walls? The complex housed everything necessary for its monstrous operations: animal breeding facilities, greenhouses for cultivating bacteria-laden crops, a dedicated power plant, dormitories for thousands of personnel, and, most horrifyingly, multiple prisons and sophisticated surgical and experimentation wards. It was a perfectly optimized factory of death, running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The victims, the Maruta, were gathered from across the occupied territories: Chinese partisans, common criminals, intellectuals, Russian POS, and anyone deemed an opponent of the imperial regime. They were given numbers, not names, and their lives became a series of controlled exposures, injections, and dissections. Their purpose was singular: to serve science, or rather, this grotesque perversion of it. Think about the psychological reality of this environment. For the doctors and technicians, the standard ethical boundaries of medicine first, do no harm, were not just crossed. They were inverted. Success was measured not by a patient's recovery, but by the efficiency and speed of their decline due to a manufactured disease. It begs the question, how does a society, how do educated individuals, rationalize such complete moral surrender? This industrial scale of cruelty was necessary because the scale of their ambition was also industrial. Unit 731 was not just testing a few vaccines, they were attempting to mass-produce weapons of apocalyptic power. They needed to understand the variables of infection, the optimal dispersal methods, and the exact window of time between exposure and fatality information that could only be acquired through continuous live-human experimentation. The Maruta were the raw material for a military capability designed to extinguish millions. Section 3. The unthinkable experiments. Bacteriological warfare and human testing. Now, we must confront the unimaginable specifics of what took place inside Unit 731. If the previous section established the factory of atrocity, this section unveils the production line itself, the chilling catalogue of experiments conducted in the pursuit of the perfect bioweapon. The work centered on 4 primary disease agents: plague, cholera, anthrax, and typhoid. The goal was simple: weaponization. This required studying the diseases in real time within the human body, a level of cruelty that defies easy comprehension. One of the most common procedures involved infecting the Maruta through contaminated food or water, direct injection, or even forced inhalation of aerosols. The scientists would meticulously track the fever, the organ failure, and the agony, often performing dissections, known chillingly as vivisections on victims who were still alive, fully conscious and without anesthesia, simply because they feared a dead body's chemistry might skew the data. They wanted pure, unadulterated information on the progress of the infection. Beyond infectious disease, the experiments branched into every area of human vulnerability. Subjects were exposed to extreme cold to study frostbite, leading to limbs being frozen, thawed, and then amputated, simply to see the healing rates. Others were placed in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out, testing the effects of high-altitude bombing on the human physique. They tested flamethrowers, grenades, and weapon effectiveness by binding victims to stakes in an open field. But the most strategically terrifying experiments were the field tests. Unit 731's scientists engineered ceramic bombs filled with fleas infected with the plague, bacterium Yersinia pestis. These bombs were then airdropped over populated Chinese towns and villages. The results were devastating, unleashing localized epidemics that claimed thousands of civilian lives. This wasn't theoretical research. It was operational biological warfare, deployed against a civilian population. Imagine the cold, calculated logic. Every scream was a data point. Every death was a confirmation of weapon efficacy. The doctors, many of whom were educated at Japan's most prestigious universities, managed to compartmentalize their moral sense to a degree that historians are still grappling with. What happens to the human soul when the Hippocratic Oath is replaced by the decree of the Imperial Army? These experiments provided the foundation for a biological arsenal that, had the war continued, could have eclipsed the horror of the atomic bomb, and the architects of this system knew it. Section 4, the shadow of defeat, scorched the earth and the race for evidence. As the tide of World War II dramatically turned against Japan in 1945, the leaders of Unit 731 faced a critical dilemma: how to erase the physical evidence of nearly a decade of industrialized human atrocity. The approaching Soviet forces, rapidly sweeping across Manchuria, posed an immediate threat to the secrecy of Pinkfang. The Imperial High Command issued a devastating order: scorch the earth. Unit 731 was to be completely dismantled, all buildings destroyed, and all remaining Maruta liquidated. This wasn't just a cover-up. It was a desperate attempt to sanitize history. In the final frenzied days of August 1945, the unit's staff engaged in an appalling race against time. The remaining prisoners, estimated to be several hundred, were systematically executed, shot, gassed, or poisoned to ensure no living witnesses fell into enemy hands. Then, the scientists and military personnel set explosive charges across the complex. The incinerators burned ceaselessly, consuming records, samples, and, tragically, the bodies of the victims. Ishii Shiro, the master architect, orchestrated his own escape with a small core team, and the most critical findings, literally stuffing crates full of tissue samples, slides, and meticulous research notes, the very scientific data derived from human suffering. The goal was simple: get the research back to Japan and out of the hands of the Soviets. Yet, despite their best efforts, the destruction was incomplete. The fleeing Japanese forces couldn't erase every trace of their horrific work. As the Soviet troops moved in, they discovered partially destroyed laboratories, remnants of the experimental prisons, and most importantly, they apprehended some of the unit's lower-ranking staff who had been left behind. The world was already reeling from the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, a new, equally disturbing horror was about to be uncovered on the plains of Manchuria. But the crucial question quickly shifted from what did they do, to who would control the evidence, and what price would they pay for it. The stage was set for one of the most cynical geopolitical bargains of the 20th century. Can the pursuit of strategic intelligence ever justify turning a blind eye to crimes against humanity? Section 5. The Devil's Bargain. Immunity for information. The end of the war did not bring justice. It brought a chilling trade-off that protected the perpetrators of Unit 7 as the Allies divided the spoils of war. Two powers, the Soviet Union and the United States, became locked in a frantic race for military advantage, and Ishii Shiro's research was suddenly the most valuable intelligence asset in the Far East. The United States, recognizing the catastrophic potential of Japan's biological warfare findings, initiated Operation Paperclip in the Pacific, though its focus quickly narrowed onto Ishii and his data. American intelligence, led by figures like Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders, understood that Ishii's records offered decades of detailed, live human experimentation, data information that could never be replicated ethically. Ishii, who had masterfully gone into hiding and even staged his own funeral to evade capture, eventually made contact. He offered the Americans a deal: complete immunity from prosecution for himself and his entire staff in exchange for the entirety of his research. The ethical crisis was immediate and profound. On one side stood the demand for justice for the thousands of innocent Maruta. On the other, the overwhelming military pressure to acquire the ultimate defense and offense against the looming threat of Soviet biological capabilities. Ultimately, the Cold War calculus won. The US government agreed to the bargain. The American rationale, codified in secret reports, was blunt. The information was of great military value and necessary for the national security of the United States. By granting Ishii immunity, they effectively silenced the Japanese war crimes investigation concerning Unit 7. The US withheld the evidence from the International Military Tribunal for the Far East (IMTFE) in Tokyo, ensuring that the names of Ishii and his key collaborators never appeared on the list of war criminals. Think about the weight of this decision. The West chose scientific knowledge derived from atrocity over moral accountability. Ishii Shiro and the doctors of Unit 731 were not executed. They were not imprisoned. Many went on to hold prominent positions in Japanese medical schools, universities, and pharmaceutical companies. Their silence guaranteed by the American government. Did this Faustian bargain truly make the world safer, or did it simply plant a seed of cynicism and injustice that would quietly influence global science and politics for decades to come? Section 6. The Legacy Unveiled. Scientific Theft and the Echoes of Horror. The story of Unit 731 does not end with the American cover-up. It continues to resonate in the shadow of stolen science and a deliberate historical amnesia. Ishii Shiro and his colleagues disappeared back into Japanese society, their secrets locked away in US military files. But the victims' suffering had generated a vast, unique dataset, and that data did not stay hidden forever. The research harvested from Unit 731, detailing human responses to plague, cholera, and anthrax, provided a significant leap forward in American understanding of bioweapons defense and offense. This stolen information became a foundational component of the US biological warfare program at Fort Detrick, Maryland. By granting immunity, the United States didn't just forgive a crime, they functionally inherited a criminal scientific enterprise. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, who had conducted their own trials based on the captured evidence and personnel, ensured that the trials of the Japanese staff they held in Khabarovsk received minimal international attention. For decades, the global narrative remained fractured. In the West, it was a non-story. In Japan, it was vehemently denied or suppressed. And in China, the truth was an open, devastating wound. It wasn't until the 1980s and 1990s, driven by the persistent work of journalists, historians, and former victims who miraculously survived or witnessed the atrocities, that the extent of Unit 731's horror began to pierce the international consciousness. Survivors came forward to testify about the field tests, the vivisections, and the scale of the human depravity. The legacy of Unit 731 is thus twofold. First, it is a haunting reminder of the absolute need for ethical constraints in scientific research. It demonstrates the terrifying speed with which ambition, when unchecked by morality and shielded by state power, can descend into depravity. Second, it serves as a crucial case study in global historical accountability. When major powers prioritize strategic advantage over justice, they do not just protect criminals, they corrupt the historical record and perpetuate the suffering of the victims by denying their truth. Today, the ruins of the Pingfang complex are preserved as a museum, a grim memorial to the thousands of Maruta who perished without names or graves. But the deeper, more unsettling question remains. In the ongoing global arms race, are we truly certain that the lessons of Unit 731, that certain knowledge is too costly, no matter its strategic value, have been fully learned? Or does that dangerous bargain still whisper from the shadows of military labs around the world? Section 7. The Path to Memory, Confronting Denial and Seeking Redress. Despite the mountains of evidence, the detailed records recovered by the Soviets, the testimony of survivors, and eventually, the declassified US documents confirming the deal with the Shitha, journey toward true acknowledgement has been long and fraught with denial. For decades, the Japanese government maintained a policy of official silence or outright dismissal regarding Unit 731, often referring to it vaguely as the work in Manchuria. This systematic denial was a deep second wound inflicted upon the victims and their families. Without official acknowledgement, there could be no true closure, and the full history of Japan's wartime actions remained intentionally incomplete. However, the tireless efforts of Chinese victims, advocacy groups, and courageous Japanese scholars and lawyers began to chip away at this wall of silence. Starting in the late 1990s, survivors of the biological attacks and former prisoners launched lawsuits seeking compensation and a formal apology from the Japanese state. While Japanese courts eventually acknowledged the historical facts of Unit 731's existence and its human rights abuses, they consistently denied compensation, citing legal immunity for state actions during wartime. The significance of these legal battles, even without compensation, was immense. They forced the issue into the public sphere and documented the horrors of Unit 731 in official legal transcripts, making denial increasingly untenable. The slow, painful revelation of the truth has compelled a younger generation in Japan to confront this dark chapter, forcing uncomfortable conversations about national memory and responsibility. Today, the story of Unit 731 stands as a powerful moral test case. It challenges us to look beyond the immediate expediency of warfare and demand accountability for crimes committed under the guise of science. It asks a story about the ultimate price of dehumanization, the way that the simple act of renaming human beings as Maruta paved the way for the most extreme cruelty. This is more than a historical footnote. It is a global warning. It reminds us that state secrecy, when fused with unrestrained scientific ambition, can create horrors far more destructive than any conventional weapon. We must ask ourselves, are we vigilant enough in protecting the ethical boundaries of science? And are we truly committed to remembering those who were reduced to experimental data, ensuring that their unimaginable suffering was not in the end scientifically useful but morally futile? Final thoughts, the unfinished trial and the call to memory. We have traced the terrifying trajectory of Unit 731, from the chilling ambition of Ishii Shiro to the industrial scale of the Maruta factory, through the unthinkable human experiments, the frantic effort to erase the evidence, and the cynical geopolitical deal that allowed the perpetrators to escape justice. The secret of Pingfang was not just a historical incident. It was a systemic failure of ethics that corrupted science, warped statecraft, and condemned thousands to anonymity. The trial of Unit 731 is, in many ways, an unfinished trial. The men who orchestrated these atrocities walked free, their knowledge traded for immunity. But the historical judgment is clear. The legacy of their work, the detailed scientific data derived from murder, serves as a permanent scar on the integrity of modern science. It is a chilling proof that knowledge gained without morality is simply an accumulation of darkness. What can we, the audience, take from this profound tragedy? It is a call to vigilance. It is a reminder that the line between scientific inquiry and monstrous cruelty is fragile, and it is guarded not by law alone, but by the relentless commitment of individuals to ethical principles. The only way we truly prevent the re-emergence of such depravity is through memory and relentless inquiry. We must keep asking, where are the ethical red lines today? Who is being dehumanized in the name of progress? And are we willing to trade justice for convenience? If this story shook you, if it made you question the cost of historical truth and the ethics of power, then you must help us ensure these victims are never forgotten. I encourage you to dig deeper into the declassified files and the personal testimonies of the survivors. We've only scratched the surface of this chilling history. Let me know in the comments which part of the Unit 731 story shocked you the most, and what do you think is the greatest ethical threat facing scientific research today? And if you believe that history's most difficult stories must be told to prevent their repetition, hit the like button and subscribe. We need your support to continue bringing you the deep, challenging truths that shape our world.